All right. Welcome everybody to another episode. We are in the deep of it, the thick of it right now. There is a hurricane barreling toward Tampa and it's going to be hitting us in about 4 to 5 hours. It could be catastrophic. It may be not as catastrophic. We don't know. Okay. So we are filming this episode before the storm, but we wanted to make a disclaimer is that this episode is focused on what happens after the storm. How do you pivot? There's a lot of different things that can happen to you. And we want everyone to know that we make some suggestions, but they're just observations. They're not how we genuinely feel telling someone they should live here, they shouldn't, they should leave, they shouldn't. That's not what this episode is about. This episode is about just providing observations about ways to be able to react after the storm and make the next steps to be as successful as possible. So we just want to kind of preface that. David, what do you have to say before we jump into this great episode?
I just want to make sure that everyone understands that this conversation is not designed to be insensitive in any way.
Right.
It's simply an observation that we are making. To your point, it is not about who should or who shouldn't live anywhere, or what the value of these communities is. It's simply we're standing on the side of the coin. One side of the coin is $170 billion worth of damage. The other side of the coin is $170 billion worth of new construction and improvements. That's what this conversation is about, what happens after the storm. So without further ado, let's get into it. And please know, if at any point you feel that we're being insensitive, we are not. We're simply giving you the conversations that we are hearing and that we are reading in the newspapers here in Tampa Bay. So without further ado, get right in.
All right, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Burn Your Boats. I'm Clark. I'm here with my co-host, David. And David, I know you're sitting you're in Orlando right now.
I am.
I'm still in the home base here in Tampa, Florida, maybe crazy. So if you're listening to this right now, we are recording this the day before we're about ready to see a gigantic hurricane that maybe we haven't seen in 100+ years hit us. And so everyone's scrambling around trying to figure out it's like a bunch of chickens with their head cut off in Tampa, Florida right now, and kind of the outlying areas. So David, how's Orlando, Florida? You hanging out with Disney right now? You hanging out with Mickey? How's Mickey doing?
Do none of those things, Clark. I am in a house that I'm not going to lose power in. Look, my wife and I, we moved to the Tampa Bay area 15 years ago. And the very first storm that came our way, they were talking about batteries and water bottles and fill your bathtub with water and prepare to lose power. Yeah, prepare to lose power for 2 weeks and generators. I'm like, we just made a hard and fast rule with ourselves as that we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
We're just not going to play that whole I'm staying no matter what game, that we were always just going to move out of the way. We were going to move early before the crowds and just take ourselves to somewhere else and then continue on with our week and with our jobs and our activities, and then kind of deal with whatever that aftermath is when we know what the aftermath is. Because, Clark, I spent the last 10 or 15 years of my life really kind of living my life on a CBT style concept. That's a cognitive behavioral therapy strategy where I will only engage with the things in front of me that I've evidence that I need to engage with them because they are there and they're real. I tend not to spend a lot of my time thinking about what might happen,
right.
And 2 days, 4 days, 5 days in front of a storm, I see so many people right now doom looping and watching 24-hour storm news, right? They're like, oh, should we do this? Should we do that? Or I'm like, it's never been my strategy. My strategy has always been, there's a storm coming, move out of the way in one capacity or another, use logic as to where to go,
right,
and then get yourself set. And then after the storm, I will then reassess where and what it is I need to do. but I don't waste my time and energy watching every 5 p.m., 11 a.m., 5 a.m. update from the weather service. So that's where I am this week. And obviously, we have a lot of people in the Tampa Bay area that are kind of doing various other strategies that they use to deal with an oncoming storm. In this case, it's Storm Milton. Clark, what have you been up to for the last few days? I see that you're still in home base. So what's going on?
I'm the opposite, right? I'm at home base. I'm extremely exhausted. Exhausted would be a good way to describe how I feel right now. Between, we just had Hurricane Helene. So I had multiple friends and network that got flooded. So spent 2 weekends ago, spent the Friday, Saturday, Sunday going out there and, trying to help move furniture out or move furniture in, or just try and do flood cleanup, right? And then had a small break, and now we're hit with this. And so I've been running around with myself, my girlfriend, and we've been playing the sandbag game. And, it's one thing to go throw sandbags, at a house that may be in a flood zone, but you got to get the sandbags, right? Well, then where do you get them? And then I remember I got to a place an hour before it opened that was like a city place where they gave you free sandbags. And it was like almost a mile long of cars. And I said, nope, I'm not going to do that. And I'll call Home Depot. I'll do whatever. So we figure out a way to get sandbags. But right now I am exhausted, and I am hoping that, we can get through this. But it is interesting, David, to see how, the things that I have to go through to try and prepare for this. And then it starts to show cracks in the boat, right? And it's like, oh, I probably should have cut those branches earlier. I should have done a few things. And then I run around and it's stressful. So I'm learning a lot, to be quite frank with you, because I don't want to have to keep going through this over and over again. And there's ways to be able to be more proactive than reactive, which is
I'm just about to talk about that. As you're talking about how exhausted you are, I'm reminded of the old bull and the young bull. You know what, Clark? I have sandbags at all my homes that need them.
Yeah.
Right? I refresh them in the spring every year. Okay? I'd say, I'm going to bring over 10 sandbags to that house. I do my trees during the year. When anything comes along, I text the tenant and say, listen, you got 6 sandbags out the back. Your trees are good. We cut them back earlier this year. And so unlike your exhaustion, I also keep my house in that condition. I keep my house just storm ready. Right. So I also keep all of the things I need, all the equipment I need. And so I'm a really big zip tie guy. So I've got like these 60 centimeters or 65 centimeter zip ties. And I just zip tie all my external furniture and everything else to trees in and around my house, in and around my houses. And so I leave zip ties at my tenants' houses. Say, listen, if you got any outside furniture, just zip tie it to the fence, zip tie it to the tree, zip tie it anywhere. And so we talked about an ounce of prevention, last week in one of our podcast conversations. And so again, this is just, if you prepare in advance and if you are a reactionary person, you're going to be tired. Yeah. But if you're kind of thinking logically, and this goes for a lot of parts of life, if you're thinking logically and you're thinking ahead, because there's the old saying that a stopped watch is right twice a year or twice a day. And so I kind of lean into that like I live in a place that has hurricanes. And whilst most years nothing happens, right? But every now and again we get an active year, and every 100 years we get a bonkers year like this year where we get hit 2 weeks ago with Hurricane Helene, and we're 36 hours away from Milton, Category 5 hurricane out in the Gulf, and replacing its eye wall at the moment, apparently. So my wife tells me. And yet I'm sitting here, I'm pretty calm about the whole thing. And we're going to have a conversation, Clark, today. This podcast called Burn Your Boat Wealth. We're not the United Nations Commission for Refugees. We're not here to have a conversation about the charity side of all of this. Right. We're here to have a real conversation about what's really going on in the real world. And so before we get talking today, I just want to make sure the listeners understand what we are going to be talking about today is about the natural evolution of creative destruction. Okay? There's a storm coming. It's going to cause a lot of destruction, right? But there are different types of storms. Clark, walk us through. So everybody says, "Oh, I would never live in Florida. They have storms."
Right.
Let me tell you other types of storms. Clark.
Yeah, so it's storms come in. They come in different ways, different shapes, different fashion. Obviously, there's seismic type events that can happen. Right, living in Florida, hurricanes are going to be a low hanging fruit, and it's just what you're going to hear on the news all the time. The news is going to focus on the beach houses, on the main thing to get blasted. Right, they don't want to go anywhere else and show that, but that is certainly something that we understand that you kind of sign up for, that you're going to need to deal with, and then you can choose to deal with it or stick your head in the sand. Either way is fine. It's just how you choose it. But I mean, there's other things too, like there's natural disasters. If you're out in California, if you've got wildfires, if you've got, mudslides, but they don't necessarily just have to be natural disasters, right? Like we had COVID. Okay, COVID came through and just turned the entire country upside down, turned the entire world upside down. That nobody saw coming. We didn't know how it was going to react. We thought, there was a huge sell-off of properties. I remember in March of 2020, a lot of people were like trying to get their houses on the market because they wanted
Yep.
to sell before, quote unquote, the market
Yep.
dropped. And then, of course, it went the exact opposite direction that nobody saw coming, right? Because how could you? But there's also other things too. Like we see a lot of people now that are having insurance issues where either they can't get insurance or their insurance was $2,600 last year and now it's $12,000, right? That is a seismic shift in the way that you view. I don't care if it's a rental property, an Airbnb, you live in it. If your property insurance just shot up $600 or $800 or $1,000 a month, that is a huge deal. Now compound that. Let's say you have 5 of those, right? So you could have an insurance, kind of seismic shift. What about if you're in Midwest America, right? And you have the one manufacturer that employs 2/3 of the town. And then guess what? They can do it cheaper in Mexico and they move out. And all your properties, your job that you had that worked there, or your renters that live in the rental, and now they don't have work anymore. What do you do? So the reason that we kind of prompted this idea is because we're about ready to get hit by a storm. Cross our fingers that when you're hearing this, that we have smiles on our faces and not huge frown faces. But being able to, it prompted us to think, what happens, David, when you have either a natural disaster or some large seismic event that happens to you, right? There's 2 ways to go, right? You can stick your head in the sand. You can feel bad. You can say, life sucks. This always happens to me. Or you can get off your ass and say, all right, this event has happened. It has happened. I can't stop it. I can't do anything, but I can figure out how to react to it in a positive way. And that's why this is a business podcast, right? This is something that we want to be able to give ideas, tips, things to think about. We want to get the wheels turning in your head as to, if something were to happen, what can you do? So David, how do you feel about all of that?
Right. So we're going to use the storm for the next hour
Right.
or so, or 20 minutes, whatever it be. We're going to use the storm as a metaphor for pivoting. If you want to be successful in your life, you better be able to pivot. You better be able to identify an opportunity. On every downside, there's an upside, right?
Yep.
Robert Kiyosaki has a great analogy that he says, we're always standing on the edge of a coin, right? On one side, there's one scenario. It could be the storm and all the devastation and the sadness and all of that. And then on the other side of that coin, there's going to be opportunity, and there's going to be, how do I play what is the reality? And the coin is always a mixture of both, right? We're able to walk and talk and chew gum at the same time. So the coin standing at the edge of the coin always represents that you acknowledge what's happening, but you also acknowledge what the opportunity or what the pivot is.
Yeah.
Many of you would have heard the term, what do you do when you get lemons, right? Obviously, we go try make lemonade. And so here's as we get started on this conversation is a metaphor for pivoting. And so I'll start out with a joke, and this is gallows humor, and it's uh, you know 36 hours to a storm. We're the ones in it, right? We're the ones where all our rental portfolios and all of our tenants and all of our developments and everything that we're working on right now is right there. So it's not like we're sitting in Hawaii
No.
having this conversation.
What, David? What is? You're gonna have to tell. Please help everyone understand if you don't what gallows humor is. Wait, please help the listener with that.
Gallows humor obviously refers to somebody who's sitting or standing on a stage and a baying crowd below them, and they got a rope around their neck, and that trapdoor is about to open, and the last thing they do is have a joke.
There you go.
And so that's what gallows humor means. But I recall a couple of years ago, many years ago, there was a natural kind of disaster in a town in England, and my wife's brother turned around to me and he said, well, it obviously is really sad that thankfully, nobody died, nobody got really hurt, but, the storm did cause, $18 million worth of improvements to the town. And whilst at the time I just thought it was funny, but actually there's almost like a grim humor to it.
Yeah.
In that there is a reality. That joke is a joke because there's something to that joke, as there are to most comedic, endeavors. And so, all week, you and I, because Hurricane Helene hit us 2 weeks ago. And so there's really two narratives emerging in my daily interactions with people. Take outside the fact that there's so much human pain, right? In, people's homes flooded, their lives are outside on the curb. They're dealing with insurance companies. They're dealing with trying to relocate and rehouse themselves. They're dealing with kids' schools. Nothing we're about to talk about is to take any of that away, right? But there is a definite narrative emerging already in the Tampa Bay area, and it's not new, and it's not about Tampa. It's really about any big seismic event. Let's take the work from home thing. San Francisco, many of our listeners will be California based. San Francisco the San Francisco rental market got hit by a massive seismic change in human behavior.
Yeah.
When everybody started working from home, and then rents start that's what we're talking about here. We're not talking about a storm per se, but we are talking about what should you have done when you were in San Francisco, take it, and there's just there's lemon water in the air, there's blood on the streets, it's just negative, nobody wants to touch it, and yet I think we all know what will happen long term to San Francisco housing market. And it's not going to be just, it's all work from home and that's the end of it. There was something to do there. And we're already seeing that here, in that all week there's two narratives at play. One, the people who can least afford to live in these neighborhoods that are low-lying and impacted by storm surge, they shouldn't really be living there. And whilst they could afford to live there in the 1950s, now with insurance where it is, and the fact that they live in, a 1950s frame home 2 blocks back from the beach, they're uninsured. They can't afford to repair the home, right, at all. And they can't afford to, in many cases, have insurance. And so is it fair for those people, and is it safe for those people to stay in situ, right? So there's absolutely the argument, Clark, where, their community is there, that's where their lives are. And there's a lot of people who will lean into that in the media as an argument, right? But I'd much rather that they don't get flooded every year and a half, because things have changed since 1950. Number one, we have bigger storms. There's global warming, if you like it or not, right? And insurance has gone through the roof. So there's the narrative A, which is I've had enough. I'm about to get punched in the gut a second time in 2 weeks. I'm selling, right? And then there's narrative B that you and I were just talking about, which is every developer, every investor is running around trying to figure out, how do I buy? And so, Clark, you've got one side selling and one side buying, right? I'm going to ask you the question, who's selling?
Well, to your point, it's going to be a lot of people that are going to be selling are going to be people that they don't have a choice, right? Maybe their flood claim isn't as much as they thought it was going to be. But I want to bring up something that you mentioned just a little while ago, and it stuck with me, as you said, okay, the people that bought the house in 1973, and it's something where they have lived there, they've built their family there, they've built their network there, they've got their favorite restaurant down the road, and they've got a house that's substandard at best. And you said, is it fair, is it safe, right? We could spend an entire episode on, is it fair, right? That's, to me, that's a very, very subjective thing to say. I live here, I want to stay here. Is it fair for me to stay here, right? Unfortunately, life is not fair, right? There's times where you have to do things that just aren't fair. But this episode is about, I think, is certainly about, like, is it safe, right? Are you enabling someone to continue to have substandard housing where the same problem is going to persist over and over and over again, right? So if we look at the safety part of it, which the safety part of it is going to impact a lot of things, right? There's so many lagging indicators from having housing that's substandard, that doesn't meet building codes, all those different things. And then it trickles down to, you've got this house that really needs to have a ton of insurance on it, right? So like in Florida, probably the number one hot topic, not named Hurricane Milton, is insurance is through the roof. You can't get it. It's very difficult, right? And so being able to see where that is, but a lot of that is because of the person that you were just talking about, right? They've been there for so long, but they're not going to knock it down and build a new house because they don't have the funds to do that, right? But is that safe? And then if you keep compounding that, David, person after person that lives, the next door neighbor and the next door neighbor, and then now you've got all these low-lying areas and all these substandard older structures, that is unfortunately creating a huge problem. And insurance companies are like, well, you're bringing me this old structure that then if something happens to it, I have to pay to put it back together, right? Well, how excited is the insurance company going to be to pay to put back together a property that needs extensive work? So guess what? The insurance premiums are going to be much higher, right? So I just wanted to make that point, is it fair and is it safe are two totally different topics.
Right.
And I think we could spend a whole episode talking about, is it fair, which kind of goes under the assumption of gentrification.
Well,
So go ahead, David.
yeah, let me jump on. Like, is it fair? I've got some question for you. Like, in the event of a storm, can you afford to go and stay in a hotel for a week or 6 months? Right?
Not a lot of people can say yes. There's a lot of people that would say no.
That's right. That's my point.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Can you buy insurance? Right? Yes or no?
Probably not.
Can you afford to do repairs if you're not adequately insured, or it takes a long time for your insurance to kick in?
No.
Can you raise your home? Can you afford to get a contractor in and raise your home?
No.
Can you afford to knock your current house that's just going to keep on getting flooded and
Right.
build a new house that's not going to get flooded? Can you answer yes to all those questions?
A lot of people that we talk to in these areas that are lower income areas, the answer is no to every single one of your questions you just asked.
Okay, so fair is not important here at all. It's like,
Right.
can you afford it?
Right.
Right? Can you afford it? Because unless the government steps in and provides hotels
Right.
in the event of a storm, it provides insurance for low income people, will provide either low cost or no cost loans to repair their home or build new. So the only fair here, right, is if the government steps in or people can afford it. Outside of that, fair doesn't come into the conversation whatsoever. Yeah. What is important in that scenario is who can afford those things, right? Yeah. And so with that being said, who is buying, Clark? Tell me who's buying. Tell me, when we drive through these neighborhoods, we talked about it last week, so it's no big, reveal, but who can afford to live in these neighborhoods? And when you drive through the neighborhood this week and there's all this stuff outside, most houses and then it's not outside this house, not outside that house, you know, who can and who should uh, be able to live in these neighborhoods
Well,
simply based on economics or in the absence of government intervention.
yeah, I mean the low hanging fruit, especially in these areas where the houses are going to be completely destroyed, is going to be the person or the company that is going to be able to come in and knock the house over, which is going to force. That's going to be kind of like that's where we were talking earlier about these natural disasters, or it starts to show cracks in the boat, right? So you can just show in terms of the foundation of a community, the foundation of the structures that are on in this town or that town, right? And what it's doing is it's showing the weaknesses, right? So if a storm comes in and it's flooded, right, a area floods, but your house is 6 feet off the ground, guess what's probably not going to happen? It's probably not going to flood, right? So yeah, you're going to have some bushes down, and there's going to have some inconveniences, but it's not going to be a devastational loss. So that is something that, in terms of who is buying, is that it's going to be these people that are going to be able to come in and create a better form of living through bringing these structures into 2024 when they're really stuck in 1924 in a lot of cases, or in 1954. And to the point that you just made is it really, our area, if we want to look at safety, right? Because ultimately, let's go back for a second to let's say the lady that couldn't afford to pay the taxes and do all the different things that you had mentioned, right? Now she's in an area low lying, right? Let's say that we see this with a lot of older people. We're in Florida, right? A lot of people come to retire here. We have a lot of retirees, right? Well, being able to get up and just jump in a car and leave is not something that everyone can do. So it's almost enabling that person to live in the low-lying area, and they can't leave. How safe is it for them if they can't even physically leave the area, right, or the house that they're in? So now we're talking about a structure that's not secured.
Yeah.
And now you got people that live inside it and are now in danger that should have probably moved to the
Yeah.
suburbs and higher areas, right, in
Yeah.
the newer neighborhood, or in an area where it's just less, it's not on the water.
Don't
So
get me started. I've been seeing it for years. I'm driving through these neighborhoods. I'm like, these people shouldn't be living here, right? I get the whole community, and I get
yeah,
the kumbaya side of it. But bottom line is, it's these are the people who are most impacted. And so, if you think that we are taking a bit of a negative side on that, or we're out of line with it, we're not. We're not saying that that's what we feel. We're just talking about the reality. But this is not about hurricanes, this conversation. And it's not going to be about hurricanes. It's about the concept of when these things happen. A coal mine shuts down in your neighborhood, right? And you're in West Virginia. How do you think counter cyclically about that? Ford Motors closed down a massive plant in your town. COVID hits, a hurricane hits, forest fires hit, tornado hits, the government raise interest rates. That's the same type of,
yeah,
destruction we're talking about. When the Fed raised interest rates in 2022, in August 2022, their goal was to destroy a huge part of the economy and destroy demand. They were creatively destroying just tens of thousands of lives and very particular industries. These challenges come in all shapes and sizes. But what this episode today is, how do we think counter cyclically? So easy to get on the news, go, oh my God, isn't it so terrible? And for the people who are there who cannot afford to get themselves out of the way, it makes for pretty uncomfortable viewing,
yeah.
right? It just does, right? However, let's think about standing on the coin. What neighborhoods, Clark, are going to bounce back fastest? What neighborhoods bounce back fastest?
It's the same in every economy, right? And it's always going to be the neighborhoods that have their higher income earners. They're typically nicer areas. And why is that? Well, it's because they're able to financially recover quicker, because it's just, if you have to do a $50,000 renovation because of a flood that happened or whatever the case may be, they probably have the funds to be able to at least get access to it. Even if they have to borrow it, they've got access to it to be able to get to it quicker, which then puts it back faster. Maybe you get the tenant back in the property quicker so you can start, recreating income. So if you look at the lower income areas versus the high. And this is not like an opinion. This is just how it is, right? So you have higher income areas, higher income earners and higher income areas, David, that are just going to be able to bounce back quicker because of the fact that they have access to more resources, they have access to the wherewithal, and that's just the proof
Right.
in the pudding, David.
And in the absence of government intervention at the lower income level, right? We're in the lending business. You and I are in the private money lending business. Are you going to originate a loan for somebody who lives in a 1929 frame bungalow, below sea level, 2 blocks back from the beach? Are you going to originate that loan?
I don't think I'd have too many happy investors, David, bringing money in to lend out when we're lending on very high risk assets. And
Right.
so that in itself is a great point, right? Like
Now
who?
let's flip the coin. Some viable developer or wealthy, high income person approaches you and says, "Listen, I just secured a lot on in a coastal area. We're going to clear the lot, and we're going to build at 21 feet above grade.
Yeah.
And we're going to have a garage, and we're going to build a 6,000 square foot house made of concrete and steel. Now, tell me, would you be interested in funding that loan?"
And it's in a good neighborhood, and the schools are 9 out of 10, and it's got all these different commercial around it, and it's got gentrification. You look at that as we would look at that particular scenario you just gave, and say, wait a second. So you've done this before. It's in a good area. You're bringing it up out of the flood zone. It's a slam dunk, right? So that's going to be something that's going to be much more appealing to bring our investors in with us to be able to lend that money out, and that in itself. And so that's the sad thing, right? And then what happens is that because those lower income areas where it's harder to get the loans, because it's not only just, David, the house that you're looking at, right? Is the next door neighbor, is their house flooded and they just left, or they just moved their stuff out and just gutted, right? I don't care how nice that neighborhood is in that lower income area. If you go in and fix it up, doll it up all you want, but if the next 3 houses have couches in the front yard that are mildewed because they've sat there for 6 months, it doesn't matter how nice that is. So that in itself is not only do you have to control your asset, but you have to control the area around it. And if people don't have the means to do it, it doesn't matter how nice the particular asset is if everything around it is falling apart.
Mm. And so, look, you might not like this, right? But these communities will be safer in the future, right? The next big storm that comes around, when this kind of creative destruction, our Mother Nature destruction, our economic destruction comes your way, in many cases, there's the concept of a technology Luddite. It's like somebody's like, oh, AI, it's going to be the down. Where's everyone going to work? Well, we're all going to do different things, right? Humans. This is the topic of this conversation. Humans are good at pivoting, right? And so the big argument is like, well, these communities, they've been there, and look, communities come, communities go. But the bottom line is these people will be safer in the long run. You'll also hear about the downsides of loss of character and loss of affordability. It's like, oh, people can no longer afford to live in, let's say, Tampa,
Right.
or live on the beach. That's kind of the point. It costs a lot of money if you're going to get flooded every year and a half. You don't want affordable housing in a neighborhood like that. Now, I don't know if this is out of line with the overall zeitgeist of the media, but do you want affordable housing that the government can't stand in and help these people in times of distress? So look, the bottom line is you're going to hear about all of the downsides over the next few days, and you're going to see a lot of
Sad
just
stories.
sad stuff on the
Yep.
news. And my main concern, I want to make sure we absolutely make this clear. We want everyone to be safe. The good news is that in this particular case, because Helene is so fresh in everyone's memory, all of the evacuation zones, the mayor of Tampa came out yesterday and said, if you stay, you will die. Just yesterday, Jane Castor, mayor of Tampa, said that yesterday. And so hopefully people's safety is kind of number one, right? We are not talking about people's safety. We're talking about how does the marketplace um, how does the marketplace react? Because this podcast is called Burn Your Boats, not patch up your old boats, right? So the storm is essentially coming in and it's burning people's boats,
It is.
right? And so how do we move forward? So, Clark,
It.
we were doing some research prior to this, and there's just an absolutely fascinating study done. And I'd like you to walk the listeners through what the researchers found um, in cities and areas that have experienced large scale storm destruction in the past. Why don't you blow our hair back here and
Yeah.
tell us what happens after a storm in reality?
It was interesting because you just mentioned this isn't Patch Your Boats podcast, and and a lot of these people are getting their boats burned. I remember when we talked to Devon Kennard, we had a really good chat with him, and he mentioned that a lot of people in their W-2 jobs, their boats are slowly getting burned. They just choose not to acknowledge it, right? And they just choose to look the other way and somewhat maybe stick their head in the sand. It's very emotional, so it's very difficult to acknowledge that sometimes you're starting to burn out. You're starting to see new fresh talent come into your work space, and they're pretty damn good, and they haven't been doing it 15 years like you. And I think that that's what is happening in something like this, right, where you kind of see the writing on the wall. And sometimes it takes an event like this to say, okay, maybe it's time. Because the thing that you're always going to see, to your point, is when you're listening, if you're listening to this right now, the hurricane is going to have happened. First thing you're going to do is see some poor old 85-year-old Miss Jones that now can't afford to leave, and that's going to be the poster child for
Yep.
this. And anything that isn't aligned with that view, you're just insensitive, right? And again, we are not the recovery hurricane podcast. We are a business podcast. So it's like, how do we look at this and figure out, sometimes Miss Jones, it's probably in her best interest, whether she likes it or not, right? Pivoting is not easy, right? There's a reason why people like to stay in their comfort bubble. You could take pivoting, David, is kind of like, you need to constantly be checking to see, are you too comfortable? Should I be pushing my limits? Should I be, stepping outside of my comfort bubble to try and make things happen, right? You don't grow when you're comfortable, right? And that's so when you're forced to pivot, it doesn't feel good a lot. It's like what you alluded to, when we in 2022 we were providing turnkey rentals, okay? And guess what? The interest rates went through the roof. We were forced to pivot and be able to find a way to provide our investors a good return through private money lending that they weren't going to get if we just kept giving them a square peg into a round hole. So pivoting is hard and it hurts, right? Sometimes it's a kick in the what, and sometimes you don't get to choose if you get that kick or not. And that's kind of what we're experiencing right now. But what's interesting is what you talked about, the research that we did, David, is that when basically a hurricane comes through, right? So the Journal of Environmental Economics and Management, okay? So these research analyzed 16 years of property data across various Florida markets. So it's not just Tampa, it's not just Miami, it's various markets, because most parts of Florida have seen a hurricane come through at a time or two. But what was interesting is that after the hurricane hit, David, the home prices actually, ready for this, went up, okay? And what happened is that wealthier buyers moved in, right? And so it's kind of like, why is that? Well, when you have less houses, right, that because they got ruined or they got destroyed by the hurricane, right, it's going to take the inventory level down, which you have supply and demand 101. Let's go back to econ in ninth grade. You're going to have a lower supply of housing. And then who comes in and actually buys up that supply? And that pushes the price up. And I think that's a little bit of the $1 million question, at least in our scenario, as to what's going to happen. But what that does, David, is when you bring the wealthier buyer in, right, they're probably going to they're going to knock it down. They're going to, make it nice. They're going to, bring in a lot of nice features about the property. And that is the controversial topic. Now you're gentrifying, right? You're buying Mrs. Jones 80, she's 82, and you're buying that house and you're knocking it down, and you're removing her from the community because now she can't afford to stay there anymore, which means she has to leave, which is almost that's gentrification, right? Which is obviously a hot topic. And I'm sure people listening are going to have different ideas as to, is it good? Is it bad? What does it look like? We're not really saying either way. It's just, this is what the data shows us. So David, what were your thoughts when you were looking at that data that we found?
Yeah, no, it needs to be understood that, I think, just to hit on 2 points that you just made real quick, there's less supply of inventory. So what happens? Rents rise, rents go up, right? And, for better or worse, we've seen that in the last 2 weeks
Yep,
since
for
Helene.
sure.
We've just seen an absolutely incredible demand for rentals. How long that lasts, we don't know, right? But there's just a lot less supply of houses on the market. That's number one. So we've seen rental rates really increase in the last 2 weeks, right? Better or worse, right? And then in the long run, these older homes that weren't on the market and weren't going to be on the market anytime soon, they suddenly do come on the market, and they can't be purchased and won't be purchased by somebody who's just going to live in that house,
Right.
because it won't be mortgageable, it won't be insurable. And so the person who's going to come in and buy that is going to be able to afford to knock it down and build on it. And that creates a large gentrifying impact in these neighborhoods. And so, look, the Tampa Bay Times analyzed property data over 4 counties, and it bore the brunt of the impact of Hurricane, I believe it was Ian. And homes sold in areas with the highest rates of flood insurance claims saw roughly 9% higher than those sold in places with less damage.
That's interesting.
Just
That's
bonkers, right? I remember doing a podcast before where, like, nothing about the future. COVID hit. We all think, oh my goodness, nobody's going to pay rent. House markets are going to fall apart. How many people really genuinely predicted what was about to unfold over the next 2 years when COVID hit? And so a storm hits, and we're taking out the human pain and we're parking it over there for a minute. This is a business podcast. And so it's so counter-cyclical, right? That these storms create, like, just these vastly accelerate the rate of growth in a region. Now, not everybody's happy about that, but the rate of growth starts to, all of a sudden, there's all these pockmarks in the neighborhood, right, of homes that are now need to be rebuilt. And so builders are coming in, roofers are coming in, developers are coming in. And so there's all this economic activity. And that's the gallows humor of the joke I just made.
Yeah.
When you hear, oh, there was like $6 billion worth of damage. Well, what does that mean? That means somebody's about to spend $6 billion here. And it's in that environment and that backdrop that that's what we're talking about, is that once the storm has gone, what is that damage mean? And so most of you listening here are in the real estate world, right? And do you run from opportunity, or do you run towards opportunity? And we're not suggesting for a moment that you guys come in here and start buying waterfront $1 million property. We're in the lending business. There is a way to kind of work with us on that level, but that's what we're going to be doing. In the last week, I've been offered a lot of just opportunities that weren't there 2 weeks ago. You'd agree with that, Clark?
Oh, 100%. A lot of different opportunities. And the question, and this is a challenge as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, is you've got to stay focused, right? Because you're going to get all these like shiny red ball opportunities. And I know a lot of people that are entrepreneurial minded, you get all this stuff being sent to you every single day. Like, oh, what about this opportunity? You start this business, buy this Airbnb, buy this tear down on the water. You have to stay very, very focused. And it's something that we have to practice daily, is to make sure that we stay focused on our craft and what we want to accomplish, and not get sidetracked by some, Airbnb on the water that got gutted on the first floor, but we could make $500,000 if we buy it and do this and that. And it's like, wait a second, that's not part of our vision. But it's not easy, David. I know you're getting, I know that stuff comes in your email and you're like, delete, but you read the tagline, the subject line before you delete it, just to make sure. It's not easy, but you've got to keep your head down.
Yeah, I'm pretty disciplined with how I approach things. And so we haven't bought any waterfront homes pretty much over the years.
Yeah.
Okay. Simply because we're buy and hold. And the homes that we were buying were not new elevated homes.
Right.
But I think it is time to have that conversation,
Yeah.
and that there's going to be a demand for and a gentrifying effect in the Tampa Bay area. But again, I just use it as a metaphor for any event, governmental, industrial, weather, whatever. Is just, I think, one of the most important skills that any entrepreneur can have in life is the ability to identify that something is broken, or it's not working, or it's starting to slow down, it's not working as well, and the ability to say, stop, pivot, time to look at where the water is flowing. Okay, so you don't like AI, right? You used to be an accountant, and AI is able to do a good chunk of your job. What do you have to do to pivot? And that's what this podcast is about. That's what this episode is about. It's about pivoting. And so when interest rates rose, prices rose, insurance costs rose, we were in the fix and flip or the buy and hold business, actually in both. But we pivoted. We're like, where is the opportunity? Where's the efficiency? And how do we use our current skills, right, to do what essentially is a slightly different business model, but it's just moving the chess pieces around slightly differently, but they're the same chess pieces. And so you and I moved over to private lending. And what private lending is we go out and we work with people who have those opportunities. In fact, we're funding a loan right now. It is a fix and flip guy who's done 450 flips in the past. He knows his numbers. He's got the skills. He's got the team. He's got the exit strategy. He's got the resources. He's got a 780 credit score. That guy is able to go in here and start creating these opportunities. And we are there now to provide funding for that person instead of me being the guy going out and building in that flood zone neighborhood, but I'd certainly fund in there. And so the podcast episode is about whatever it is that you're going through in your life, or whatever it is that you see in your industry, and whatever it is you see in your town. Always ask yourself, are you moving? Are you growing and getting bigger? Are you getting smaller and more fearful? Right? So if you're getting smaller and more fearful, maybe it's time to think about a pivot. If you're getting bigger, it's time to laser focus in on that, identify the things that are making you get bigger and more successful, and focus on those. And to your point, stay away from the shiny objects. But a storm, as I say, Clark, is just another pivotal event. It is not the end of the Tampa Bay area. Let me ask you a quick question, because I said this to my wife the other day. I said, it must have been terrible to be around in the times during the fall of Rome, right? And she just laughed at me. I said, well, kind of funny that Rome is still there, right?
Right.
Here we are, 2,000 years later. Is Rome fallen?
Yeah.
Or did just something change? And so we get this kind of media narrative about, this is not like, we have a storm coming. This is not going to be pretty. And this is going to damage the coastline. This is going to damage some of the city infrastructure. But all of this damage is going to lead to repairs, tremendous economic activity. And with the love of God, nobody gets hurt or gets killed.
Yep.
But the bottom line is that creative destruction happens. And how we react to it will determine if you, the listener, are going to be a benefactor, that you're going to be a benefactor of that event, or if you are going to ignore it and whistle as you walk past it. And so we leave it here, I think, today, Clark. We're going to make a shorter episode because we've got we've got a little bit more to do with regards to running around and taking care of our tenants and whatnot. But Clark, do you have any summary here as you go back to doing your sandbags and doing what it is that you're going to do?
I don't want to leave this episode because I don't want to go back to doing sandbags.
You want to stay here for a bit?
So, the pivoting thing is just so, it's so important. It forces you to think outside the box, and it's going to be interesting. Like when this storm comes, I did some quick numbers, David, and I have 23 tenants that are in some way the path of this hurricane, right? And when this hurricane comes through, and it's going to do what it does, and it's gonna show the cracks in my portfolio, right? It's gonna show the cracks in my business model. It's gonna show the cracks in how I run my business. It's how we run our rental business together. And although it's gonna probably sting and it's gonna be a Mike Tyson, punch in the face, hopefully not. But sometimes that may be a good thing because it's gonna force my hand to tighten up on what I should keep, what I should sell, what I should fix, my property managers, how I communicate with tenants, all those different things. But because I've been comfortable, I haven't been forced to really try and fix things. Money comes in. I look at that. So, trying to look at this glass half full is that sometimes you do have to take, when you pivot, you're always going to have to take a step back. It's going to suck. It's not fun trying to rebuild things and start new things. But if you're just constantly trying to put a square peg into a round hole, ignore things, ignore that AI is doing this in your business. And you know what? That's not going to take over my job. And the same thing in ours is that you want to keep your eyes open when you listen to this and not stick your head in the sand and just say, I'll just deal with it another day.
Right.
And sometimes you can do it on your own proactively. And sometimes a hurricane comes through at 140 miles per hour and forces you to do it, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
And that's where we're at. So, I hope everyone out there, if you're listening to this, you were safe. If you were in the hurricane zone through a lot of big piece of Central Florida, hope you're staying safe and that you're doing okay and that you didn't get flooded and that there's no injuries and things like that. We don't want to come off as insensitive, but it is what's going to happen is going to happen, whether I feel good, bad, or indifferent about it. And the hurricane doesn't care how I feel about it, David. It doesn't care about how you feel about it, but we can choose how we react to this situation to become better, faster, stronger. And that's what we wanted to accomplish today. So David, with that, I think that we're going to sign off and go do some more sandbags. You're going to go across the street, hopefully to Disney and with the kids and enjoy some Mickey Mouse time. And like I said, we hope everyone is safe, hunker down. And David, we will see you next time.
Yeah, we'll be back with our next episode. We'll give you an update if we still have roofs on our houses. And don't think for a minute we're being flippant about that. I could, not have a roof in my house in the next day or two. But, we'll keep you all informed. We're going to use our CBT. We're going to wait and see what evidence we have. And in the meantime, we're not going to freak out because there's just no point in what ifing in life. And so if you have enjoyed this podcast and you enjoy our Burn Your Boats take on things, would you please subscribe to our podcast and share this episode with one person? Just take that three little dots beside the episode here and share it with one person. So I think you'd enjoy this. This is a different take on storms. And subscribe so that next week and the week after, that you'll have instant access to the podcast. When we put a podcast out, you'll see it right there in your podcast feed. So could you please do that? Because we're trying to grow it. And the more we grow it, the better guests we have on. And we do have an amazing guest coming in next week to talk about how to use your self-directed IRA funds way more efficiently than putting them in a CD. And so next week, we have an amazing guest about using your self-directed IRA. So until then, let's hope we have roofs next time we talk, and let's hope everybody stays safe, and we will talk to you after the storm.
Thanks, everyone. See you soon. Stay safe.
You've been listening to the Burn Your Boats podcast with Clark Lunt and David Shaw. We would love to hear from you. Please reach out at burnyourboatswealth.com with comments, questions, and if you have a topic you would like Clark and David to discuss on an upcoming episode. We would very much appreciate it if you took the time to rate and review Burn Your Boats podcast on your favorite podcast listening app, and make sure to follow and share on social media. Content in Burn Your Boats podcast is for entertainment purposes only and is not legal or financial advice. Please review our legal disclaimer at burnyourboatswealth.com. Thank you for listening.